Hello, welcome to the Manasplained podcast. I'm Connor. Today I'll be talking about the deck I built for Lady Caleria? Something like that. She's an archer, 7 mana for a 3/6, which you can tap to deal 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. So a lot of archers tend to have this effect. They're pingers, but they can only ping creatures, and only during the combat step if they're attacking or blocking. So I decided to go archery tribal with this because why not? I've never built an archery tribal deck before. I've never really used archers that much anyways, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to like dig into that, see what they can do. So yeah, I really hope you like the deck. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It helps a lot. The channel's exploded in growth. I think I got 45 subscribers over like 2 to 3 weeks recently, which is absolutely amazing. Thank you everyone for all the comments and subscriptions and everything like that. It really means a lot. So for the deck breakdown, 10 theme, 10 sub-theme, 5 synergy, 3 protection, 6 vigilance, and 8 Deathtouch. The theme is archers, obviously, and I could only find 10 besides the commander that I actually liked and that I thought were worth adding to the deck. And then the reason I have Vigilance and Deathtouch here is so that you can attack with your archers, and then their Vigilance, so they don't tap during combat, and that way if they get blocked, you can then tap them down to shoot out your opponent's creatures, and then if you have Deathtouch on them, it makes it way easier to kill your opponent's creatures. So that's kind of what I decided to go with there. And then the sub-theme is untappers, so you can shoot down your opponent's creatures if they try to attack you on their turn. And then for the rest of the categories, 5 draw, 13 ramp, 8 removal, 0 board wipes, and 36 lands. Within Selesnya, if you're not doing specific things, you can't really draw cards. Green's card draw is very dependent on having big creatures or a ton of creatures, and then white's card draw is dependent on having small creatures enter often or drawing cards, but your opponent also draws cards. And so I don't really like the giving your opponent's cards and you cards at the same time. Something like a Lauren of the Third Path, how when it enters it destroys an artifact or enchantment, then you can tap it, you draw a card, and an opponent draws a card. Not really a fan of those effects. I'd rather not give my opponents more resources that they could potentially use against me. And so because of that, not a lot of card draw here, which kind of sucks. And the removal is allowed to be a little low here because the whole point of the deck is shooting down your opponent's creatures with your archers. So that's okay. And then the ramp I kept kind of high because the commander does cost 7, and I'm feeling like they'd want to kill your commander and your other creatures pretty often because having archers just pinging down their creatures is probably going to be really annoying. So that leaves us with a grand total of 4 crossover cards. I'm not going to lie, this deck's probably pretty weak. Having a pinger that can only hit creatures and not your opponent's face is kind of rough. And the strategy is not super strong, but it is still kind of fun. You can attack pretty indiscriminately because of the Vigilance and Deathtouch, and then if your opponents ever try to attack you, you just pew them down. So yeah, it's a fun strategy in a way, but again, it's a pretty weak one. So like I said earlier, the theme is archers, and I'll jump into them now. So as you can see, they're all archers. They all tap to deal a damage. Elite archers can deal 3, so that's a little bit better, but if you have the Deathtouch, that amount of damage doesn't really matter. And then the Davenant healer can prevent damage, but you're more than likely going to be tapping it to then deal the damage. And then the other archers in here, Brigid, Hero of Kinsbale, is probably the best archer in the deck. It being able to do 2 damage to each attacking or blocking creature target players controls is insane. It lets you indiscriminately attack into like even a huge board of creatures, even if they have a ton of like 1/1 blockers or something, or even 2/2 blockers. Like, doesn't matter. You can just take them all out, which is crazy. Jagged Scar archers, they can deal damage equal to its power to target creature with flying. It doesn't have to be attacking or blocking, so you can just take out a flying creature with it, which is wild. And then Viridian Longbow is one of the best cards in here because it lets your creature just deal 1 damage to any target. It doesn't have to be flying, it doesn't have to be attacking or blocking, and it just lets you ping down any creature at any point as long as it doesn't have indestructible or hexproof, if you are able to give the creature you equip the Viridian Longbow Deathtouch. So yeah, Viridian Longbow is kind of goated in this deck. Now for the sub-theme. So the sub-theme, like I said, is untap abilities, both active and passive, and I'll get into what I mean by that now. These are all the passive tapping abilities. They don't require you to activate an ability or put some kind of mana into them. They just do their thing. Seedborn Muse probably being the strongest one here, just untapping all of your permanents during each other player's untap step. Drum Bellower also being very strong, untapping all creatures during each other player's untap step. Ohabi Caleria, I'm guessing this is the same creature. Like I've said before in other videos, a lot of these old legends, they've kind of remade them into newer cards that actually do things. And if you were going to build this deck, I recommend just swapping out the Calerias for each other. This one is also card draw, so whenever an archer you control deals damage to a creature, you may pay 2, and if you do, draw a card. So that is a good amount of card draw there if you can afford to pay. That is kind of expensive, but at the end of the day, it's card draw that you don't need have big creatures for or a lot of creatures for, which is super useful. And then Quest for Renewal requires you tapping creatures to put counters on it, but then after you get enough counters, it does the same thing that Drum Bellower does. Again, all these cards being passively untapping your stuff is great because you don't have to sink any mana into it beyond just casting it for the first time. And then these are all the actively tapping things. 2 Arms is an instant, which untaps all of your creatures and then draws you a card. So it's a cantrip, replaces itself, super useful. 1,000-Year Elixir also gives your creatures haste. So then you can, but for activating their abilities, and then you can pay 1 to tap it to untap a creature, just like Majorite Stone. Again, that's phenomenal. Reconnaissance acts sort of like a Mazavith, letting you remove an attacking creature you control from combat and untapping it, letting you pay 0 to do that. So if you attack with all of your creatures, it kind of acts like a pseudo Vigilance in a way. It's not as good as just straight up Vigilance in a deck like this, but it's still okay. And then the last 2 ones here, Seeker of Skybreak, letting you untap a creature by tapping it. It kind of acts like a 11th archer in the deck in a way like that. And then Seraph is probably one of the most interesting ones because your creatures have hexproof until you tap them, and then the damage you're dealing is Deathtouch damage. So yeah, it's kind of weird. I'm pretty sure that's how that interaction works. If I'm wrong, please let me know, but I think when you tap them to deal the damage, it will be Deathtouch damage. I'm not 100% sure on that, but let me know down in the comments if that's how that works. So the synergy cards are a little bit all over the place. They kind of comes in different shapes and sizes. It's not one kind of cohesive group of cards, so I'll go over all those. The craziest card here probably being either Concordant Crossroads or Throne of the God Pharaoh. That card just lets you deal damage equal to all of your tapped creatures, and since you're going to be tapping your archers, or attacking with them, tapping them and stuff like that, if your opponents don't block you, then you're just getting damage through with the creatures. But if they do block you, you tap them, kill their creatures, and then you get to deal they take damage based on how many creatures you have tapped. So they they basically take damage no matter what that way. Illusionist Bracers lets you duplicate the effect of one of them, lets you hit multiple things, which is great. And then Greatbow Doyen just is a lord for your archers, making them a little bit buffer, which is so useful. Concordant Crossroads could come back to bite you, but with how many ways you have to deal with creatures in combat, most likely your opponents are going to be using Concordant Crossroads to hit each other so that you don't kill their creatures, which will just help speed up the game and is another way you can win by getting your opponents to hit each other in the face. So green has a lot of ways to give Deathtouch. Also, colorless has a lot of ways to give Deathtouch. So I'll go over those. These are all the colorless Deathtouch cards I added. They're all equipment. Basilisk Collar probably being the best and most famous one of all of them here. Quietus Spike's really interesting because you can half someone's life total if your creature actually manages to deal combat damage. So that's kind of insane, forcing blocks and then the creature Deathtouch, tap it, kill the creature blocking it. Yeah. Quietus Spike is kind of insane. And then the Gorgon cards also just giving Deathtouch. Gorgon Flail also giving a slight buff to power and toughness is useful. But again, Basilisk Collar probably the best one here because the lifelink from the archers will also help pad your life total because people might start removing your stuff and then attacking you for killing their creatures and whatever. So Basilisk Collar will help pad your life total a little bit. And these are the rest of the Deathtouchers. Bow and Oro and Frostfang both give your attacking creatures Deathtouch, so they won't have Deathtouch on your opponent's turns, but they will have Deathtouch right now, which is super useful. Also, Oro and Frostfang just lets you draw cards whenever your creatures deal combat damage to players, which they'll probably want to block, which then you get to kill them. So yeah, Oro and Frostfang, absolutely amazing card. Again, I'm not sure if that's how Seraph works, but I think that's how Seraph works with archers. So again, if you know, let me know in the comments. And then Venomous Fangs is just an enchantment that gives your creature Deathtouch. So yeah, I love all these cards. Now for the Vigilance, so that you can attack indiscriminately. There's less Vigilance than Deathtouch cards because some of the Vigilance cards kind of like, they all affect the board of your creatures, not individual creatures. So you won't need as many of them because if you draw multiple of them, there's kind of no point. So these are all the Vigilance cards, Angel's Trumpet probably being the best one here, because at the end of each player's turn, it'll tap all of the creatures that didn't attack this turn, and then that player takes 1 damage for each creature that did not attack. So this makes your opponents kind of forced to attack unless they want to take the damage, and then because they're going to be attacking with their creatures or else they take the damage, you'll be able to tap to kill them, but then they might not attack because your creatures could tap to kill them, so they'll just have shields down, so they'll be forced to take damage, and then during your turn you get a free attack. And Angel's Trumpet works on so many levels in this deck, it's actually hilarious. Radiant Destiny also will give your archers a little boost, +1/+1. You need to get to the City's Blessing, so having 10 permanents to give them Vigilance, but that shouldn't be hard with the amount of ramp I have in this deck to get enough lands out. And then Brave the Sands is such an awesome card, giving your creatures Vigilance, and they can block an additional creature each combat, which it's so good. You only need half as many blockers to block a couple of attackers, and then you can still tap down to shoot them down. It's great. All of these cards are so good. So the protection's basically exactly what you'd expect. Kind of interesting. I was thinking about some other protection stuff, maybe fog effects or something like that, or kind of heroic intervention like cards, but not that card because that card's too expensive. But there weren't enough creatures in order to need a card like a heroic intervention that would protect your board in that way. And so yeah, I settled just on these 3 cards. Sereth back at it again with the Hexproof. It's great protection for your commander and the couple of archers you'll have out. Again, it protects the board, but it's probably only going to be protecting like 2 or 3 creatures at a time, so the deck isn't super go wide in that way, so that's fine. But then Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots will also give the archers haste, so they can tap to shoot down your opponent's creatures and stuff like that. So yeah, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, I love these cards. They're phenomenal cards, but they're extra good in this deck because of all the activated and tapping abilities that your creatures have. So the draw in this deck is abysmal, unfortunately, but I'll go over it because like it's sad how bad the draw in this deck is. So I don't know how often you're going to be drawing cards with Mask of Memory, but it will also force maybe some unfortunate blocks from your opponents, and you can tap down to shoot them and kill them. So Mask of Memory, you may not get to draw cards off as much as you'd like to, but it will force your opponents, if they don't want you to draw the cards, to lose the creature, which is super good. Toski, also letting all of your creatures get you draw cards if they deal combat damage, like Rowan Frostfang. Toski also being indestructible is nice, makes it less susceptible to removal. Harmonize, it's just a classic. If I have a green deck and I don't have any other colors that are good at card draw, I'll just drop a Harmonize, because 4 mana to fill your hand with 3 cards is honestly, it's still a good rate. Like it's still fine. Every time I play a Harmonize, I never feel bad about it because it'll help me hit my land drops, get me some more gas, might hit some more ramp that's needed for something. So yeah, I love that card. And then again, Ohabi Caleria is back. Probably the most inefficient card draw on the deck, but you can still activate it multiple times. And with something like Seedborn Muse, you'll be able to like untap all your archers, and then deal more damage each turn to then draw more cards with Ohabi. So yeah, it is probably super inefficient, but once you get a Seedborn Muse and this out, they'd be cooking. So the ramp's amazing in this deck because we have green, and it's pretty bog standard ramp. One card I did put in here because the Selesnya deck that I put in almost all of my Selesnya decks because it's so strong. So Sol Ring, classic, but Mirari's Wake. Oh my god, every time I play this card, it still blows me away with how strong this is. Only being 5 mana and doubling all of your mana production from your lands is kind of insane. The fact that it also gives like an Anthem effect as well, like holy crap, it's so good. It's so good. It's kind of it's still like, I have a Gishath deck, which is the dinosaur that when it deals combat damage to your opponents, you get to reveal that many cards from the top of your library, and then put all of the dinosaurs onto the battlefield. The rest go to the bottom of your library in a random order. And the crazy thing about Gishath with this card is, 1, it gets 1 more power. 2, you get to get Gishath out so much quicker. And so in that deck, this card is a powerhouse. I've had some other Selesnya decks that I've put this in, or Naya decks that I've put this in, and you need if you have cards like Mirari's Wake or Zendikar Resurgent, which Zendikar Resurgent has card draw on it, but if you have cards like this in your deck, you need to have sufficient card draw to usually help supplement them. But this deck, unfortunately, doesn't have that. But Mirari's Wake will also help with your card draw issues with something like Lady Ohabi, or whatever her name was, Caleria, that one where you have to pay the 2 whenever one of your archers deals damage to draw a card. This will help pay for that as well. So, and your commander costs 7. So yeah, Mirari's Wake really is super helpful in this deck. The most interesting other ramp card in this deck is Harvest Season, where you search your library for X basic land cards, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control, and they put them onto the battlefield tapped. If you have like 3 or 4 tapped creatures, that's 3 mana to get 3 or 4 lands out, which is a ridiculous rate. And then these are all the bog standard 2 mana ramp spells that I run in all of my green decks. Selesnya removal, you have a lot to pick from, but I tend to pick these because they're so efficient and because they can hit so many targets. Beast Within, Stroke of Midnight, Generous Gift can all hit a permanent, although Stroke of Midnight's limited to non-land permanents. I have had that come up once or twice when someone had something like a Field of the Dead out, and I just had to get rid of it because that was probably going to win them a game, or someone else had a Rogue's Passage out, where they had a giant commander that could easily deal combat, like commander damage lethal to people. So Gen gifting one of those was also kind of important because I had other removal that was going to be able to, or someone else had removal that was able to hit the creature, like the commander, that was like an issue. I was able to Gen gift the land that was going to make their commander unblockable, also slowed them down a bit. I feel like Beast Within or Generous Gifting, like a problematic land like a Field of the Dead is okay, because over the course of the game, that land will just win them the game. And then again, Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, 2 of the best removal spells in the history of Magic. Here's the other 3 removal. These are all the artifact and enchantment-based removal. Traxxas Fall, again, having 4 targets for only 2 mana is insane, and they're all extremely relevant. Artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. There are so many ridiculously powerful creatures with flying that you just need to get rid of, like an Atraxa. So, Atraxas Fall is absolutely amazing. Return to Nature, you can exile a key card if someone has like some recursion loops or shenanigans going on, or if they have some giant flashback spell that they're putting in their graveyard, you can easily just get rid of that, which is an underrated part of this card that I've used a few times that I was so glad I had. And then Dismantling Wave, one of the strongest removal spells I've ever played. Every time I play it, even if it only hits 2 things, that's perfectly fine, because that's still 3 mana to hit 2 things. That's awesome. So the lands, Selesnya deck, I had a lot of lands in here that are typed so that they're fetchable with stuff like Farseek and Nature's Lore and stuff like that. I do have 1 or 2 lands in here that are very cool though. So Gavany Township, you can pay the essentially 5 mana, because you have to tap it itself to put +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This will help buff up your archers a bit if you want to start hitting a little bit harder. And then Wirewood Lodge, you can untap an elf with it. A couple of the archers in this deck are elves, including our commander. And so being able to untap your commander with this so they can hit other stuff is absolutely great. And then obviously Unclaimed Territory, helping you cast your commander or your other archers is just very nice. And then I'll say it this video, say it in every video, that I have a deck that's 2 or more colors. Wizards of the Coast, please put the Battle Bond lands in all of the precons. We would love you for it. So I didn't have that hard of a time making cuts for this deck. It seemed pretty straightforward. I've had some other decks where I've got to like 150 cards, and then by the time I got to 120, I was really having difficult cutting cards. But I don't think I really had much difficulty until I got down to like 103, and then I might have had some. But yeah, this deck came together pretty quickly, all things considered. So there's no really rhyme or reason for how I organize all these maybes. Get Lost, new removal spell, absolutely amazing. It's incredible. Legolas's Quick Reflexes, you can untap a creature, but it's an instant, so you only get to do it the one time. It is very good because it could protect your commander. Hexproof and all that other stuff, it's so good, but at the same time, I just rather have the untap abilities that are repeatable. Poison the Blade, again, for the same reason. It's a one-time Deathtouch. Yes, it replaces itself, but the other card that untaps all your creatures for 2 mana and draws you a card just seems so much better than just a creature you control getting Deathtouch and replacing itself. And then Thrabian Watcher and Heliod, God of the Sun. 4 mana for a Vigilance Anthem effect, it just seems like a little too expensive when I could get the same effect for 2 or 3 mana. The last cards here, Shamanic Revelation. I didn't add it because I didn't have enough creatures. It didn't seem like it'd be worth it. Raking Canopy is a really cool card. I have archers that can shoot stuff down, so I don't need this. But if you have a deck that has no way of dealing with flying creatures, hey, Raking Canopy might be a way to deal with them. Assuming they're not bigger than 4. If you're up against a dragon deck, yeah, this won't do anything. Beast Whisperer, again, for the same reason, Shamanic Revelation and Vanquisher's Banner just didn't have enough creatures to draw. But again, these are all, like Vanquisher's Banner, classic tribal card. Beast Whisperer, Shamanic Revelation, go wide green decks, love them, but this deck just wasn't going wide enough, unfortunately. And then Mazavith, I thought about it, but I'd rather, with the commander being 7 mana, I don't want to spend a land drop on a Mazavith when I have enough deterrent in my creatures, and I have enough ways to untap them with other cards that doesn't require essentially wasting a land drop in a deck that is going to be probably pretty mana hungry. So that's the deck. Let me know what you think. I was a big fan of building this. It's not very strong. It's a quite weak deck. But it would probably hose a lot of weaker decks. Like at weak... This deck sits in a really weird area where it could definitely hose a lot of really weak decks that wouldn't have enough removal because you have so many just removals on sticks that you just get to tap to ping stuff down. But at the same time, at any table with any amount of power, this deck has no staying power. Your opponents just be able to either pick apart your board or just swing into you with so much damage. So I don't really know where this deck sits, and I had a lot of trouble finding a way to build it in a way that it would be strong. But I still had a lot of fun building it, and I think I did a good job with the cards I was dealt. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this, or if you've tried strategies similar to this. These are all my socials. Twitter is when I post, when I put these videos live. I still haven't made any content for TikTok yet. I'm still trying to find time to do it. It's weird. It's hard to find time to brainstorm content ideas, because these decks I don't really need to brainstorm them, because in making the deck I'm working on the video, so I don't need to sit down and really think about the content I'm going to make, because they just kind of make themselves, which is really cool that way. But yeah, I'm really trying to figure out what I'm going to do on TikTok. And then Architect and Moxfield is where all these deck lists live. So thanks for watching, and as always, get building, splainers. Alright, that is so